item, which I'm sure many of you are here to discuss, and I see a couple of the folks who can help us out here, is ferry horns. Now this obviously has been an issue here in the north area because of some regulation that the Coast Guard has had on the books for a number of years, but based on some requests from kayaking organizations, they have been more stringent about asking all maritime operators to adhere to that. And it's caused some problems. And New York Waterways is here. Celine Mizrahi, who represents Congressman Nadler's office and has been working very diligently on this issue, is here. So, Celine, would it be appropriate for you to kind of give us a little background?
Sure, absolutely.
Perfect.
And also Mary Cooley from
Yes.
Senator Squadron's office has been very active, so I'm sure, Brent, you can have some things to chime in as well.
Yeah, I should say, actually, you know, Congressman Adler's office, Senator Squadron's office, all of the downtown elected officials, and your board leadership, the chairs of this committee, Catherine and Noah, have all been very involved in all of these conversations that we've been having. So, you know, as Anthony said, and please, if you can't hear me, just wave and I'll try to yell a little louder. But as Anthony said, there are Coast Guard regulations that have been on the books for many, many years. They're national regulations. They don't apply specifically to the New York Harbor or to this area. So any waters that the Coast Guard controls, any boats that are regulated by the Coast Guard, there are a set of national regulations that require them to sound their horns or whistles or do some sort of sound signaling when they enter and leave a port. These regulations are extremely specific. We've looked very carefully and closely at them ourselves. They go the number of horn blasts, the duration of the blasts, the decibel levels of the blast. So I know that some of you are aware of this already, but the fact is that these regulations exist on the books, and again, apply to all of the waterways and all of the vessels under Coast Guard supervision or authority. Our offices had in the spring a meeting with the Coast Guard in which we discussed whether they could make any kind of shift in these requirements. You know, understanding that for many years the boats have been coming in and out of this harbor without incident. We certainly, our offices, and we know the community board and all of you, would never want to do anything to jeopardize safety on the waterways, but we're very aware of what a big nuisance and really quality of life issue it is for downtown residents and Battery Park residents. That this is a constant barrage of noise and something that was really feeling untenable for folks who live near the terminal. And we expressed that to the Coast Guard. They understood that, but really felt strongly that their hands were tied because of the nature of these regulations. They're national, they're something that have been on the books for a very long time. It's not something that they sort of had room to make an exception on. And so they suggested to us that we speak with the ferry operators about whether or not there was something that could be done at the, really at the level of the actual equipment that is on the boats, to see whether there was some way to minimize the noise while still being in compliance with the regulations as they currently stand. Because changing regulations is no small task. It requires going through a long process that involves, you know, sending things to the Code of Federal Regulations, being published, going through Washington. It's a lengthy and very involved process. So the hope was that there would be a quick fix that might be able to be put in place using equipment. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be a possibility. However, and I'll let New York Waterways speak to this as well. New York Waterways spoke to us about a number of ideas that they had that might be some ways to move forward in terms of getting the Coast Guard to not just make an exception, but actually to kind of look at the actual circumstances of this port and this area and think about whether there are other ways that they could go about making sure the waterways are safe, still having some signaling, because I think it'll be getting a full exception from the signaling requirements is not something the Coast Guard is willing to consider. But figuring out a way to really minimize that noise. And New York Waterways, we've shared those ideas, and New York Waterways has with the Coast Guard, and they're actually very interested in it. I spoke with the Coast Guard today, and they are looking very closely at all the ideas. They're discussing it with headquarters in Washington and internally as well to kind of look at the mechanisms for making those kinds of changes and looking at really what the possibilities are to reduce the noise requirements on the ferries coming in and out of this terminal, and plan to work very closely with New York Waterways to look at the next steps. We've stressed to them many, many times, and again today, how important this is, how much support there is for this kind of move among the downtown elected officials, among the community board, among community residents, and that this is really something that we all want to find a way forward for, and we'll do whatever it takes to get there. So the next steps are really for the Coast Guard to be working with New York Waterways on examining some really kind of concrete ideas for reducing the noise requirements for these boats. And then from there, seeing what we have to do, whether it's a regulatory change or whether there's some sort of waiver or exception process that we can go through. We're hopeful that we can find a way forward that doesn't include regulatory change, because as I said, that is an extremely long-term process. And hopefully we'll be able to find a way that we can avoid that level of change being required of us. But